Well, hey, what's going on, Common Good family? Thanks so much for tuning in to another Love Your Neighbor Sunday community partner conversation, where we really wanted to be intentional about using Love Your Neighbor Sunday to highlight the work and the stories of different community leaders and organizations who are really on the ground, on the front line, so to speak, loving and serving their communities in just very real and tangible ways on a regular and ongoing basis. And so today I'm super, super excited to have with us one of our very own community members. And I'll share a little bit more about that in just a moment. But we have with us today, Fonnie Ishimitsu, who is a senior director of principal giving at Seattle Union Gospel Mission. That felt like a mouthful, but Fonnie, first and foremost, thanks so much for jumping on Zoom with us and taking time to have the conversation. And really excited on a personal level just to be able to introduce you to the rest of the CG family. I think a lot of folks who are watching this may not realize this, but you have actually been a longtime friend of Common Good, and we've known each other. I think way back to your days of when you were over at Jubilee Reach, and I know that, as we were just talking about earlier before, jumping into this conversation, that you and Mitch have been tuning in online. So in a lot of ways, you are part of our Common Good. You're part of the Common Good family. You're part of our online community. And hopefully one of these days we'll get you all to come hang out with us in person. So, but yeah, thanks so much for being here and making the time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So I know we have, there's so much that we could cover, and we're probably not going to be able to cover everything, but I do just want to jump in, and maybe we could just start for those who, I feel like there's not going to be too many folks that have no concept or no notion of what Seattle Union Gospel Mission does, because you have been such a long-standing organization in our community, in the surrounding communities. But maybe you could just start by giving us a little bit of the brief overview, the elevator pitch, so to speak, of the Union Gospel Mission. What does the UGM do? Who do you serve? And maybe we could start there and then kind of jump into the rest of our conversation from there.
Yeah, happy to, Royce. So the mission, of course, have been serving our greater Seattle community since 1932. We actually opened our doors on August 21st, 1932 to be exact, wow, and celebrated our 90th anniversary just a few months ago. The mission, we serve our unhoused and our homeless neighbor. Started when 21 churches came together to serve people who are hungry and in a house out of a church-backed soup kitchen during the Great Depression. And as the mission grew, it expanded its services to provide clothing and counseling and shelters. And the mission's approach has really evolved greatly over the years based on the need. And we take a relational approach. We see the unhoused not as homeless, but as our homeless neighbors. We know their names and hear their stories. Our vision is really to see every homeless neighbor beloved, redeemed, and restored. We believe our mission is to bring the love of Jesus and hope for a new life for our homeless neighbor. We meet our homeless neighbor where they are, invite them in with a blanket, a meal, a hot cup of cocoa. And then when they make the decision to come inside, we provide wraparound services to help guests stabilize from the start all the way to post-graduation. You might even have seen our most iconic building in Pioneer Square, which is our enhanced shelter for men. And we have one in Kent for women. And we have unique programs that serve those without addiction who just fell into misfortune and need a safe place to go to, known as our LINK program. And as well as those that are recovering from medical out of the hospital, like the ECP program. We also have a 1-year residential recovery program for men and women. We have 2 for men, which is located in Riverton, Marion, and 1 in Capitol Hill that serve guests with dual diagnoses, which means they have addiction and mental health. And for women, we have our Hope Place Oaks recovery program on Othello campus. And we serve all people who come to us. And we have a holistic model that ensures our homeless neighbor will begin a path to self-sufficiency. Our program has a success rate of 70% after 2 years out of graduation, measured by 5 categories. So if they have housing, job, connected church communities, counseling, and education. And just last year, we helped 722 individuals begin that path to self-sufficiency.
Wow. Wow. Awesome. Thanks so much for sharing that. I appreciate that. And before we jump into the rest of the conversation, how did you get involved with UGM? And then maybe share a little bit of the specific role that you play
Yeah,
within the organization.
sure. Oh gosh, that's a long story actually.
Okay.
But the long story short, prior to joining the mission, I was working in higher education, raising funds for scholarships. And before that, I worked for Jubilee Reach, like you mentioned, which is an organization you all know very well as a church family. But when I was in higher education, I missed being in social services. I remember
Mm,
praying to our Heavenly Father. I was like, God, what is breaking your heart right now? Be careful what you pray for. God revealed to me that our homeless neighbor has been on his heart. Soon
mm,
after, a mutual friend of my current boss introduced me to my boss, Jason. Then a call came from Jason asking me to apply for the director role. I said no 3 times. I felt like it was a Peter denying Jesus moment. Eventually,
mhm.
I decided, why not go through the process and see what God has in store for me? Well, here I am 3 years later. Now I serve as a senior director of principal giving. I oversee the principal giving program, plan giving program, as well as our foundation and grants program. I also oversee the planning of our annual gala, Callus, save the date, April 6, 2023. I never thought that I would be here in this life stage. It really is an honor to meet our guests in program, hear their story, and see where God is leading them. The colleagues I work with and the donors and volunteers I partner with are all so dedicated to serving our homeless neighbors and to each other. We have 25% of staff that came from program. And I've never
Mm.
thought that I'd get a
Wow.
chance to walk alongside my colleagues and see what God has in store for all of us this season.
Yeah. Amazing. Amazing. Um, I'd love for us just to talk about, and I don't really like to use the word issue, the homeless issue. And
Mm-hmm.
I appreciate the language that you all use, right? Of
Mm-hmm.
these are unhoused neighbors, these are our guests. But when I think about the homelessness, right, and it is such a big issue in a certain extent, right? Certainly, really across the country, and not just here, but I think Seattle. I think the last time I checked, we were up there at like what I think the third large in terms of homeless population. I think we are third largest behind LA, New York, and LA. Is that I might be
Wow.
misquoting?
Mm-hmm.
But what like so from your vantage point, the work that you all are doing at the mission, what would you say are some of the root causes? What are some of the driving factors at the heart of homelessness and those who continue to be temporarily displaced? Yeah, maybe we can kind of just share a little bit around that. I think that could be helpful for our
Yeah.
listeners.
Yeah, it is sad. I mean, it truly is sad to hear that our beloved Seattle is ranked third in the country, having the highest homeless population. I mean, this is a
Yeah,
city I grew up in. I mean, I grew up on the east side, but still, this is a city I grew up
yeah.
in. I mean, just some statistics I just want to share in the Count on Us report. I mean, 16% of homeless people report the loss of a job was their cause of homelessness. 11% was drug use
Mm,
and alcohol use. 5% eviction. 6% divorce, separation, or breakup of a relationship. 6% domestic violence. 5% mental health illness or medical problem. I mean, I can go on and on and on, right? But if
mhm.
you read the Count on Us report, you can see that the rest of the reasoning and the percentage that people gave us as to why they're homeless. When you hear these statistics, you might be tempted to say, well, the problem is an economic one. So there are definitely economic factors.
Mm,
However, think about this though, Royce. If most people who are watching this lost their job or were evicted or went through a divorce or separation or couldn't afford rent, would they end up homeless? Well, I might have to say most likely we won't. I know I certainly won't. But why is that? It's because many of us have relationships with family members, churches, friends who would help us out in time of financial hardship. We would have a place to stay. So I don't
mhm.
want us to tempt us into saying that economics is really the main cause of homelessness. So what has led us to this homelessness crisis? I mean, it is a multifaceted problem. I want to talk about the whys, but there's another issue I want to address first. That is how the mission responds to people who are struggling with addiction and homelessness. What are some typical ways people respond to the crisis? I think over and over again, we have seen people respond to homelessness and people struggling with it in a couple of ways. One, you might have heard this before, get a job mentality. Some people look at a homeless person and their response is along the lines of, hey, why don't you just get a job? Or stop panhandling, pull yourself up by the bootstrap and make something of yourself. People with this reaction tend to stress personal responsibility as the reason or the answer to the homeless crisis. I think personal responsibility is important and it plays a role, but it falls short of addressing the root cause of homelessness. Another reaction may be give them a home mentality. It goes something like society has failed this person. We have been so blessed and privileged and must have come at this person's expense. Well, people with this reaction tend to believe that society should save them. Humanism and the basic goodness of people will solve homeless crisis or solve the homeless crisis. Again, society plays a role, but it will never address the root cause of homelessness. So what I'm about to share might jolt you a little bit. So brace yourself. What I'm going to say is that homelessness is not the problem. It is a symptom of a problem. And I want to repeat that. Homelessness is not the problem, it is a symptom of the problem. If we simply say, provide a home to most homeless people, the problem will linger. But if you dig deeper and address the root cause, the problem of homelessness will still not go away. But how do we know that? It's because it's based on God's design for people. And two, we've seen it firsthand at the mission. When we have done this work for 90 years, we've learned a different narrative. And other symptoms and issues that homelessness that maybe surfaces addiction, mental health issues, abusive relationship, chronic illness, or poor housing, living condition. These are all symptoms. At the mission, we believe broken relationship and trauma are at the root. And there's so many factors I can go into how broken relationship and trauma manifest, but really at the mission, we believe the core and the root cause is broken relationship and trauma.
Interesting. So maybe could you unpack that a little bit more in terms of, I'd love to hear then, well, actually two things. One, what would you say are maybe some of the other like common misconceptions, right? Folks that when they think about the homeless crisis, what are some of the other misconceptions that folks might have in regards to the particular issue? But then maybe you could address a little bit of like, how is UGM uniquely positioned then to, if part of, what the UGM is saying is at the heart of it is really these relationships, then how does that then inform kind of the unique way that you all are kind of approaching the issue in terms of kind of loving and serving and caring for our unhoused neighbors? I'd love it if you could maybe share kind of around those, those two things.
Sure. So I'll address the misconception first, and then you might have to remind me because
the second one.
The second piece. So when you initially asked me about the root cause, or the root that causes an individual experience homelessness, I shared about the get a job mentality, get yourself housing, pull yourself up by the bootstrap. I mean, these are all true misconceptions, and too often we view our homeless neighbor from the same lens as what we have experienced life. I mean, for me, I will never truly understand someone who's gone through homelessness because I never experienced homelessness myself. And not everyone is that fortunate, but there was a study that begun in 1997 by the CDC, and the result of that study gave us ACE scores, which is known as the adverse childhood experience. And some of you who are watching might even be familiar with this, and some might even have taken that test yourself. In this study, it was discovered that traumatic events in childhood can have negative impact on people in their adult years. And these traumatic events are categorized in three areas: abuse, neglect, and house dysfunction 10 simple yes or no questions emerge, and the number of questions a person answers yes determines their ACE score on a scale of 0 to 10. And the question include whether or not you experience physical, emotional, or sexual abuse as a child. They include whether or not you experience physical or emotional neglect. And they include family dynamic questions such as whether you have mental illness in your home growing up, an incarcerated family member, substance abuse or addiction, domestic violence, or divorce. I mean, those are hefty, categories. And what the researchers discovered is that this has been confirmed over and over again in the study. And generally speaking, the higher the person's ACE score, the greater the risk of that person experience various types of dysfunction as an adult. So for example, if you have a ACE score of 7, you're 30 times more likely to attempt suicide as an adult. The level of dysfunction starts to increase rapidly at the score of 3 or higher, and it all begins at childhood. And then the high ACE score does not just have an effect on one person's mental or emotional well-being, but it can impact the physical health as well. Childhood trauma impacts the whole person. So high scores correlates with higher increase of obesity, diabetes, depression, STD, broken bones, heart disease, cancer, stroke. I mean, I can go on and on, like drug and alcohol abuse. So how does trauma relate to homelessness? Well, studies show that if you have an ACE score of 4 or more, you're more likely, you're more than 16 times more likely to experience homelessness. If you have one of those 4 is sexual or physical abuse, you're 32 times more likely to experience homelessness. In fact, for every increase of the ACE score, you're 16 times more likely to be homeless. I mean, that's pretty significant. And several years ago, we did an informal survey of our men in recovery program, where we asked them to take the ACE test. Of those 30 or so men, the average ACE score was a 9. And so that's pretty significant to know that there are ramifications from childhood that affect people's adulthood, and we can't write that off. We have to look at the root cause. What happened to that person? And every person has a different story.
Gotcha. So then I guess, so that second part to my question then, in terms of with this data and then kind of with this understanding of what are some of the root issues, how then does that inform kind of your approach, the mission's approach, right, to serving and loving and caring for our unhoused neighbors? Maybe you could talk a little bit about, I know early on you mentioned kind of some of the different programming, but maybe you could just kind of dig in a little bit to kind of sharing, like, what are some of the specific ways that you all are trying to address then kind of some of those root causes as you serve our unhoused neighbors.
Yeah, so I would say, as I mentioned earlier, our approach is a relational one. So our approach is grounded in biblical truth. That is what sets the mission apart. God's design for the world and for the people is good. I mean, very good, in fact, right? I mean, he created people to live in perfect relationship, in perfect community with him, with others in the created world, and with ourselves. But unfortunately, we all know the story. Sin came into the world and marred God's good creation. And as a result, we have broken relationship with God and others. And so we have broken relationships often leads to broken lives. And because of this belief, the mission is focused on a relational approach. And we're trying to change the conversation of a volume-based approach to a conversation effectiveness. We aren't only answering how many meals we're serving or how many blankets we gave or how many bed nights we offer. We're really looking at each person and how many people can begin a life of self-sufficiency, a life of sobriety. I mentioned this earlier before. The mission has a success rate of 70+% of those who graduate after 2 years of graduation. We want to help our homeless neighbor to be healed completely. Addressing the physical needs is the first step to building trust. And for us to have the deep inner work of what is causing the individual to fall into homelessness in the first place. So you will see us, go out in the community. We have our outreach team. We give them a blanket, we give them clothes, we give them water to people who are struggling, still unhoused and still on the street. Some people might say that, oh, we're simply enabling them. Well, we have a saying that responds to that criticism. Yes, we know that blankets and clothing and food and water is not going to just be the end all to help them get out of homelessness or to escape their addiction and trouble. But it is hard to meet someone's need or tell them about Christ when they're, hard to say, but they're kind of dead inside, right? It sounds harsh, but it's true. We have to meet someone's physical needs first to build that relationship. And so from there, when we have that trust from the person, when that humanity is restored in their life and they start telling us their story. So many times I go out and search and rescue and I hear these stories and we pray for the people on the street, and I get time again and again, it's like we're reaching out to them because we're building that relationship. And once the person is willing to come inside, then we help them stabilize. So our program, or what the mission does, is really broken down into 4 areas. We call it survival, stabilization, recovery, and post-graduation, also known as aftercare. So survival is what I mentioned, is how we love and care for people who are living on the street, often in the midst of their addiction. Some of the programs is outreach team, search and rescue, which some people might even been on, serving a meal, mobile shower, trailer, pet support. So many. And when we go out to do outreach during daytime and nighttime, our presence out on the street to build trust. That's the whole point. Building trust start by showing up every day, looking at our homeless neighbor eye to eye, sit with them, hear their story, hear their day with a hot cup of cocoa, and start slowly breaking down that barrier that our homeless neighbors have built up over the years. And then you hear the life story come out and you hear that they have experienced so much in their life, and that's what led them to chronic homelessness. And then when they decide to come in, well, we move into a stabilization phase. It's how we love and care for people by helping them get out of their current environment, giving their bodies and mind time and space to recover from the impact of addiction and living on the street. This helps them get to a place where they are program ready, meaning they are in the posture of experiencing real change in their lives. Some of these programs include work therapy, daily Bible study, communion groups, prison ministry, one-on-one case management, chemical dependency assessment, mental health assessment. So much wraparound services. And then when they're ready, they go into a recovery phase. Is how we love and care for people whose lives are being changed by God through our year-long recovery program. And some of them are, 12 months in residence program where they get domestic violence support, mental health services, education, career support. They even learn about fitness, how to take care of their bodies. Moms get to learn the ways how they are caring for their child and how to be a parent again. And then once that process, the recovery process is done, well, actually, let me just say the recovery process is ongoing. And so post-graduation, after they graduate, is how we love and care for people after they graduate from the actual recovery program. Helping men and women build the relationship, engage in local churches is one of our greatest desires for them. But I say that post-graduation is an area where we do need to develop more. What happens to people after they graduate? We care for them. And if they don't have a stable relationship or stable support system with healthy relationship and a community in place, then they often then go right back into where they started. So it is really vital for us to be in community with them. It's just how God has intended us to do life together.
Yeah. I love that. So what does that look like then in terms of And I guess this is a good segue into one of the other questions that I had for you is, um, what is the role of the church, right? What is the role of a Christian, someone who believes in God, believes in Jesus, and is a follower of Jesus? I guess maybe two-part. One, what is as someone that works for the mission that is rooted and grounded in the heart of God, what would you say is kind of the calling and the conviction for those of us who call ourselves Christians in terms of why we should care, for one, and then two, like, are there ways that you're currently partnering with churches when you're talking about kind of the need for community once they actually graduate from the program, or what are some of the other ways maybe that churches, Christians can come and partner with the mission?
Yeah. So, what we'd say is that as a Christian, knowing that the Lord has created that perfect unity and that we're built to be in community, I would say, come and join us. See what's happening on the ground. Get to know a face and a name when you do outreach and come serve a meal. A lot of times during those moments is when you get to hear a story with our guests, or maybe even meeting somebody who's a staff and have gone through the program. When you're out with our team, you'll never have to feel unsafe. I mean, I certainly do. I'm an Asian woman. I'm tiny, and oftentimes, you go out and you're like feeling unsafe. But when you're with the team, you never feel unsafe. And we're always looking for volunteers and supporters. But what I would say is, as people of faith, why should you care? I think the same question is, what would Jesus do? Jesus will be out meeting people where they are. He would not turn a blind eye. He would go out of his way to talk to that person, just like how he did with the Samaritan woman. That will be his response. He would go and reach out. So I would say, as a person of faith, what does that look like for you? Is God calling you to reach out, or is it stay within our bubble of, well, this is the issue, there's nothing more we can do? There's always things that can be done. But what I would say is, don't do this work alone. I would say, don't enable, but come alongside to do the work and learn about what's actually happening, what's existing already, and find a ways to get involved and come volunteer with us and get to know our guests and program. Because I bet you, and just the same thing happened with me, it's once I've gotten to know the story of a person, it completely changed the way how I see homelessness and the way that people have experienced homelessness.
Yeah, that's great. That's really helpful. You had mentioned don't do this work alone, right? And it makes me think about, because I think I've felt this in moments and times too, where you see a homeless person on the street, right, and your heart goes towards them, right, and there's a deep down conviction of saying, I want to help, I want to do something, but oftentimes it's the question about how do you help, right? How do you help in ways that are actually helpful, right? Or are there, I guess my question to you is, are there ways to help or to show God's love that could be more helpful than others? And are there actually things that we could do even as Christians? Because sometimes, I don't know, I think Christians, we have good intentions, but perhaps because of our lack of proximity to, our lack of knowledge, right, and understanding, we have these misconceptions of, okay, here's why a person is unhoused. And that then leads to particular actions of, well, this is then what we should do to help. And is it possible, and have you seen this, has the mission seen this, where folks want to help, but they're helping in ways that are actually not helpful, or perhaps even causing more harm? Like, what are your thoughts around that? Is there a right way to help? Or can there be wrong ways to help? Or would you say that, whatever you could do, just do something?
Yeah. I would say, don't give money. If there's anything I've learned, it's don't give money. I know it's kind of odd to say, but don't give money directly to someone you see on the street. Instead, you would, again, want to do this work where you, of course, don't put yourself in a dangerous situation. If you see somebody who's being really aggressive, don't approach them. Be safe. But when somebody is approaching you and they are obviously trying to have a conversation, look them in the eye. Show a little bit of humanity to them. And sometimes they would say to us, like, why can't you just look at me? And that's hard. And they have a story. Sometimes it's taking a moment if they're approaching you, like, offer a meal. Can I offer a meal? Do you mind telling me what's going on? How's your day? Maybe that will start a conversation. Offer that, there are services that are available. Can I help you get down there? Can I offer to help you to get into program? But of course, it starts with looking them in the eye when they do approach you and ask. Of course, again, don't put yourself in an unsafe situation.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate you sharing that. Well, I know we're running out of time. How, for folks that are saying, hey, after hearing this conversation, maybe they love hearing the UGM's approach, right? And they're like, hey, I want to give, I want to support, I want to participate. What are ways that folks can do that? What's the best way to get involved? What's the best way to learn more? Are there specific needs right now that the organization has that you're like, hey, these are kind of the folks that we're in need of in terms of volunteers or jobs? What are some of the kind of immediate needs right now that y'all have?
Well, I would say 2 actions that people can easily take, of course. Volunteer or give. Volunteers sign up at our UGM.org website. We are in dire need of search and rescue volunteers. We need people teaching classes for our women and children. We need mentors at our Riverton Men's Recovery Program. If you can even serve a meal, it's a great start. We have a place for you. But check out the UGM.org website and see our volunteer list of ways that people can give their time. And of course, give, I say, as a senior director of principal giving. We are a nonprofit solely operating based on individual support. Consider helping us reach our goal of helping 5,000 homeless neighbor in program by 2030. So those are 2 key tangible actions, I would say. Awesome.
No, thanks for sharing that. Well, Fonnie, any last words, thoughts, things that maybe you would want those tuned in, watching, who are listening to kind of walk away with from this conversation? Is there anything that's kind of impressed on your heart that you want to communicate to our church?
Sure. Well, first, thank you for having me and giving me an opportunity to share more about where God has me in this season. I think this work needs the church community. I mean, really, truly does. And we are in a homelessness crisis, 3rd and largest in the U.S., following after New York and L.A. But there is hope. Just come down and meet my colleagues who are overcomers, and it can be a new story for those who are still experiencing homelessness. I can share with you that all hope is not lost. And so come join us, come volunteer, come reach out to me. Happy to chat more. But there is hope. Jesus is doing something. God is doing something here in Seattle.
Yeah, I love it. Well, Fonnie, thank you so much again for your time. Just super grateful for you as a person. Grateful for the work that you're doing, the work that UGM is doing, and certainly looking forward to continuing the conversation and journeying together and being on mission together.